Hi, my name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Innovation Showcase. The main purpose of this ongoing series is to inform viewers about exciting innovations and creative individuals across the fields of business, science, technology, education, and the arts. Today via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guest Alaina Mahoney. Based in Providence, Rhode Island, Elaine is a highly accomplished blacksmith and painter and the founder of AM Design and Fabrication. During the program, we're learning why and how Elena's interest in painting and blacksmithing came about. We'll view and discuss some of her exquisite artwork, and in the process, come to better understand and appreciate how Elena goes about creating her unique installations, as well as learn about her commitment to keeping the blacksmith's craft alive while pushing it in new directions. Let's start by meeting Elena and then hearing all about her outstanding artistry. Welcome, Elena. So delighted to be able to be here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been fascinating reading a little bit about your background, your career development, craftsmanship. Eager to find out lots more and have you inform viewers. As a means of getting into that, would you please start by briefly sharing anything else you'd like to add about your background, artistic, professional interest, please?
I mean, that was an excellent introduction. I guess the bit that I would add is that I was actually my intro to art was as a painter. And so I started with painting and did that for many years before moving into metalwork. And I think that's one of the things that makes my business and some of my artwork somewhat unique.
Just building on that before we hear maybe more about the origins of your blacksmithing, how does your background in painting influence the work you do in metal?
I think one of the reasons I got interested in blacksmithing, and also similarly, one of the reasons I'm interested in painting in particular, is I'm interested in mark making in general. And so in blacksmithing, just like in painting, a hammer blow is similar to a brushstroke. And in that you can see the maker's hand, you can see the artist's hand. And I find that infinitely interesting because the artist, that's something that only that particular artist can make, those brushstrokes, those hammer marks. And I just find that very interesting. And I've always been interested in painting. I paint from photographs, and I like the concept of filtering that photograph through a human, through me, through the painter. And obviously because I'm painting from a photo, it will look similar to that photo, but it's now been filtered through me. And
Hmm.
I do this, I try to think about the same thing when I'm doing blacksmithing work, that the sort of imperfections that some would call certain things, I look at that and I say, those are the things that are actually the most special about this work. And I look at that when I'm making my own things and also when I'm doing restoration work and learning about other artists' work who
You
came
know,
before me.
Interesting, interesting. When you were studying painting at MassArt, what first drew your curiosity into blacksmithing?
I had my freshman year roommate took a foundry class and convinced me to do the same. She was a jewelry maker or a small metals major. That's what they called it at MassArt. And they, although you were allowed to sort of take electives from anywhere in the school. These were considered more sculptural electives, so I wouldn't have been on my radar otherwise. And the funny thing is, at the time, I was kind of afraid of ovens and hot things, and she convinced me to do it. And I'll never forget one of the first pour we had. It was an aluminum pour. My teacher at the time, Matthew Hintzman, he pointed at me and he said, "You get in the suit." And what that meant was you would adorn yourself in this silver suit, which is a heat reflective suit, and literally get inside of a 2000-degree oven
Wow.
to retrieve what are called ceramic shells. So it's kind of like a ceramic, which has a negative space that you're going to then pour aluminum into. And yeah, I that cured my fear of ovens. And ever since then, I just took every sort of large metals class that they had at MassArt, and I've been hooked ever since, essentially.
Wow, that is definitely a baptism by fire introduction
Absolutely.
into the craft.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating, fascinating. So you started there, and I know, how did your development at Mass Art continue your development as a blacksmither?
So let's see. I took there was a blacksmithing class that also Matthew taught, and I took that, which was a good introduction. But I will say blacksmithing, similar to painting, takes many years to develop a skill level. So, I certainly wasn't capable of using it in my art well at that time. So that's something that I just dipped my toes into at Mass Art Blacksmithing itself. But what I was able to make art from was iron casting. So as I mentioned, my first class was a foundry class where we learned indoor melting and casting of aluminum and bronze. But there was also a club, if you will, at Mass Art called the Iron Core that was started by my friend John Capel. It was a continuation of the Iron Guild, which had started years before, and it was literally a group of students who decided they wanted to learn how to melt iron there. And they had to build furnaces from scratch. And at first they were terrible and worked poorly. And over time we learned, how to make them very efficient and do that well. And so that was where I got really interested in metalwork. And some of it had to do with the concept of being able to, since we were learning how to build all these tools, this was something that I saw that I could take away from school, where I didn't have the infrastructure, the gas powered infrastructure to
Mhm.
melt aluminum and bronze necessarily. Um, Now I know I could have done that as well, but at the time I was thinking I can make this furnace, I can bring it, and I can do this wherever outside of school, and I really liked that. And so I made a whole series of these cast iron mullins. That was probably the largest project I did at Mass Art, and they were plants that had grown out of the rubble of an industrial wasteland that I used to take a lot of photos and paint from. And I then these mullins sprouted and died, and I was casting them and replanting them back in that site. So that was probably the largest project that I did with metalwork at Mass Art.
Speaking of moving away outside of Mass Art, why and how did AM design and fabrication come about?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I was, although I was starting learning blacksmithing, I wasn't necessarily good at it. The same goes for fabrication. So, these are all different subsets of metalworking, where blacksmithing is where someone is heating up steel or any metal and hammering on it, right? Casting is where you're heating metal till it's liquid and pouring it. And then fabrication is the art or craft of, I would call it cutting and welding, essentially. And a lot of fabrication skills are similar to, say, cabinetry skills. You need to learn
Hmm.
how to make things square and do all that sort of thing. So, all that is to say, I was a very poor fabricator, just from because I was just starting. So, I wanted to be able to make gates for my paintings. That was really the goal at the time, but I found it very difficult. And so, I got a job working at Schiff Architectural Detail in Chelsea, and I did that for about 3 years, and that's where I learned to be a very proficient fabricator. And I was lead fabricator there for a couple of years, and then I decided I wanted to move and start my own thing. And so that was when AM Design was born. I moved down to Providence here. This is a really excellent place to have a workshop. There's a lot of industrial space, and they're also very, very supportive of artists. So
Nice, nice. Well, we're going to transition to some of your creations. And as we do, speaking of making an impression with your hands, the logo that you have for your company has a very interesting backstory. Can you share a little bit?
this logo was developed based off of a a little graffiti scratch that I used to make. I used to scratch my initials into everything I could when I was a little kid. And as I was developing this logo, I called up my mom and I said, "Hey, do you know any places where I might have done that? You know, when you used to get angry at me?" And she said, "Oh, I think I have one." She photographed one, and with a little bit of editing and a little, some vector scanning, that's where this logo comes from. So it's a stylized AM based off of a scratch, I think, in a cabinet door that I made when I was probably 6.
Definitely. Well, definitely from early on, you were destined to be in this type of hands-on craftsmanship for sure. Um, right before we enjoy several examples of your work, just briefly share a little bit about what your workshop space is like and how you go about creating some of the work you do.
Sure. So this image was taken by Rue Sakayama. She's an excellent photographer friend of mine. And as what you can see here is a corner of our studio where I do blacksmithing. So the facility itself is about 6,000 square feet, so it's extensive. But this is the area where this is my favorite part. So on the left, you can see our a side blast coal forge that has a water cooled tweer, and then one of our power hammers, that's an Anyang 80-pound power hammer that I use with dies to form and forge metal. And then we have a fabrication area where we work with steel, bronze, stainless steel, aluminum, etc. We have a small machining area. We have a wood shop, which we use more than you would think, just to make jigs and
Hmm.
things. And then we have a design studio and art studio where I find that we did an expansion a couple years ago, and I have found that extremely helpful just to have, you need a space to think and to be able to put together ideas. And so the studio is where I do that.
Speaking of the thinking part, what's the process like when you're beginning a new piece? Do you sketch? Do you play around with the material? How do you go from the beginning to some of the finished products that we're about to see?
I guess it depends on if we're talking about the business, then usually a client will come to me with a concept, and it really depends on how I start depends on how they start. Meaning sometimes they give us finished plans, and we're
Mm,
going to just build those. We do a lot of high-end fabrication, so that's the case often where a designer will give us a finished plan. The next stage from that would be someone has an idea of what they want, and in those cases I tend to ask them for some images from Pinterest or something, just so I have a starting point. So I'll start with that and a budget, and from there I can design. Or if it's a really open-ended project, then with the business side, I tend to always start with the budget, because that's the thing. Without a budget, the world's the limit, right? And I sometimes some of this is all about mind reading, where I have to sort of get to know a customer, right? And try to pull out from them what they're gonna like and dislike. If we're talking about art, I'll develop concepts and they'll sit around for years sometimes before I build something. And sometimes that it has to do with not quite having the technique down, meaning I'm not sure how I
mm.
want to build it, or sometimes the circumstances aren't right. That's kind of one of the challenges of having a business and being an practicing artist, is making time for the artwork, which isn't bringing the money in, right?
For
Um,
sure, for sure. I mean, that's a whole other topic. And we don't have time for today is just learning the business part of, say, the craftsmanship and how those two go together. But in our time remaining, really want to enjoy and appreciate and hear about some of the finished products you've done. And the first one, like to hear a little bit about the background and what the assignment was, this island cemetery gate in Newport.
Sure. So this was a project that came from having worked on the Belmont Chapel, which is a beautiful chapel that was restored in the past several years. And then this is one of the entrances to the cemetery. And the architect on the project sent us a photograph of what used to be there, which was essentially this. And really the nice thing about doing this project is, so it was a gate plus several fences, a couple of them curved. And the cool thing about this project is that we built it in much the same way as it would have been built. It was an early 1900s fence, which means that they had welding at the time. It was gas welding, not electric welding. But again, because of that, you'd be hard pressed if you were restoring this in another 100 years to know if this was built now or if it was
Mm.
100 years before.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a tribute to your work for sure. Moving on to get another sense of the range of projects you're involved in. This is at the Samuel Dexter House in Charlestown. Can you share what your work was this occasion?
Sure. This was a really interesting one. This is for the veterans of Abraham Lincoln Post 11, which is at Samuel Dexter House. And they gave me a very blurry photograph of a cast iron fence that was
Hmm.
here and asked me to replicate that. Now that spurred a bunch of research. I look at lots of foundry catalogs and try to find perhaps the casting. That didn't work in terms of budget to do a fully cast iron fence, so I designed a fabricated version, and we used this oval theme, and we found these beautiful Salem pattern posts that we already had in pattern that I thought looked good with the building itself. And we produced about 170 feet of this for them.
Wow.
Yeah, it wraps all the way around the building, and it really is a statement. I always say that the metalwork is the jewelry on a building, right?
Mm.
Where
Nicely
it's like,
put.
does that make sense? Yeah.
For sure. Oh, it's so exquisite. Look at that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is going to be, one of our main things is I want to make, especially with fences like this, projects like this, we want to be long gone before it needs to get worked on again. That's how we build everything so that it can be worked on again, but also so that it's a legacy item. Yeah.
Well put, well put. And moving on to another area, a little more residential. In Melrose, you worked on these handrail.
Correct. So this was a fun project because the posts were fully forged. So those, you can sort of see one in the foreground. Those holes were punched and drifted, which is a
Hmm.
process I really enjoy. And then the posts were tapered. And then I also produced these little shoes that go at the bottom of the posts. And as you can see, all these twists and turns, that can be a really tough bit of a math problem to figure out, and a layout problem, which is something that I really enjoy getting that right. And it went in perfectly, and I was really proud of that.
Yeah, I mean, just so much problem solving, creativity throughout all aspects of your craftsmanship. It's in addition to the skills and the metalwork is amazing.
Thank you. I have a very skilled team, and I over the years, I haven't necessarily done this on purpose, but almost all of them have been artists or have had some sort of artistic background. And honestly, I think that's a real asset to what we're doing.
For sure, for sure. And moving on to a totally different project. This was, I believe, a donor tree for public radio in Rhode Island. A little bit about the backstory for this, please.
Sure. They had a huge anniversary party. I think it was in 2016 or 17. And we did a performance iron pour where we cast iron leaves, and then donors, we would have their names etched in a copper placard and put it on the leaf. And so this was the tree that I had to produce to then hang those leaves on. So this is made out of steel, and it disassembles so that it can sit in four or so boxes. But it was a really fun problem solving situation, but also it led into a series of artwork, which I'm still continuing, where I'm making metal trees. So
Wonderful,
yeah.
wonderful. And moving on, totally different area, very special project. A few words about the memorial bench we see before us.
Sure. So this was a really special project. A customer reached out to produce a memorial bench for his wife who had passed away.
Mm.
And she really liked flowers and she was a geneticist. So, as you can see, I have a variety of flowers. They're all based off of all native flowers that grow here. And I designed it based off of a Victorian couch. So this was something where he came to me, gave me those very small details, and I just went from there. And he agreed, he agreed with everything I came up with, and I was able to produce this piece. And that was our shop kitty Clementine, who's sitting on there, by the way. But so you can see the double helices in the back to indicate the genetic.
Mm.
And then the top or the seat is made out of ipe, so that's all carved wood to kind of look like a tufted leather seat. And this is installed in the sheep pasture in Easton, so in Easton, Massachusetts. So if anyone is in the South Shore, you can look at that.
There's a wonderful shot of just the intricate detail in your work. Wow.
Thank you.
Incredible. Incredible. And moving ahead to very current undertaking, I am Codman. A few words about this initiative.
Sure. So it spells out I am Codman Squares. You can see. So on the right, you'll see artist Destiny Palmer. So I actually went to Mass Art with, she was a painter, and she approached me about this project that had been in the works for years, literally since pre-pandemic. And she knew she wanted to she wanted to spell that out. And I suggested an inflation technique where we weld two flat pieces of steel, heat it up, and inflate it like a balloon. So
Mm.
that was the technique we used to make these letters. And they're made out of stainless steel. And then she painted the I am, that's all a custom pattern designed by her. And in the center, you'll see Flora Matheson. So she was the fabricator on this project, but we're really proud of this piece. It's in Codman Square in Dorchester, which opened a couple of weeks ago. And Mayor Michelle Wu was there, so that was a really fantastic ceremony. But you can see the intricate painting and the I am on this, and you can also see how like with the lighting sort of shining, you can see how 3D the letters are. This was a
Yeah,
really fun
very much
project.
incredible, incredible. And
Thank you.
continuing with just the range of your work, more moving into more artistic creations, a few words about cloud trees that I believe you did for Chauncey Hall and Chapel Hill School.
Correct. So there's an artist there who her name's Mae Abdul, and she's been teaching there for a while, and she's been basically building a sculpture garden for them. She's been
Ah.
collecting art from various artists. There's a Vivian Beer there. There's several other really beautiful works. But this was my contribution. So as I mentioned before, when I made that last tree, I decided, I really like this. I really like the idea of the tree as the canvas, and then I can put these sculptural elements on it. This honestly, there's not like any deep background on it. It was something I wanted to make. It's funny because with painting, I have a really sort of long process in terms of coming up with ideas. With sculpture, I'll tend to just have an idea and say, this is a thing I want to build. And so that's where we're looking at here. It's kind of this, funny, whimsical thing, but um, also, the clouds here are also done with that inflation technique, and then
Mm.
galvanized. So the
Mhm.
clouds will stay bright, but the tree trunk and branches will continue to rust over time, and I think that's very interesting.
Terrific. We're fortunate to have some images here of project you mentioned a little while ago, the Mullen project. As we shift through them, a few words about what we're enjoying.
Sure. So what you're looking at are forged sheet metal stage one mullein plants. So they're biennials. So their first year they look like this, and they're kind of fuzzy, and you'll see them on the ground, although they can grow pretty large. So these were the steel versions. And then I also made cast iron versions, as I mentioned earlier, and I actually planted them back where they came from. And the idea behind this is I was interested in the idea of artifacts. And I liked the concept that these would eventually break apart and end up in the soil, and that someone, a traveler in, 50, 100 years could find a piece of this and just be like, what the heck is that? I find that infinitely interesting. So
Again, just looking at the detail of your work. Wow.
these are produced with the organic burnout technique. So these are literal replicas of the organic mullins that were there. I basically coated them in wax, burnt some of the wax away so you could get a lot of that detail, and then burn them out in a kiln once they've been covered in ceramic shell. So that's the other special thing about this process is they're literally the ones that were from that site.
Mm.
And
And
that's one that's in place.
wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Alaina, what do you hope people take away from your work once they've encountered it?
Oh my goodness. I guess a sense of further curiosity, with the sculptures. I certainly want someone to wonder about the origins. With the work we do for AM Design, I would love for someone to see it and find it beautiful enough that they want to look at the details, because we put a lot of work into the details. Um, and with the 2D work, similar thing. I want to create a sense of curiosity.
How do you see your dual role as a painter and a blacksmith evolving, say, over the next decade?
So if you gave me all the money in the world, I would be creating probably small structures. I'd be creating probably small chapel-like structures. And then I would be adorning everything and creating paintings surrounding a particular theme. That's one of the things that kind of goes through all of my artwork, this idea of taking the macro and the micro and making them, as get pushing the whatever theme I'm working with as far as possible. In between the architecture and the adornments. So I think that's what I would be doing. Hopefully I'll be doing that in 10 years.
Fabulous. In closing, looking back how traditional skills and trades like blacksmithing has been dealt with, passing on skills, do you feel that sense of responsibility of sharing with others your techniques and approaches to keep the artistry, the craftsmanship going in new and different directions?
I do, and for a while I would teach once a year, and I'm going to try to get back into that because first of all, when I teach, a lot of women take my class, and I think that's very important. And I do try to keep at least one intern going in the shop at a time,
Hmm.
just because yes, I do feel that it's very important to share knowledge and that none of this should be kept secret. And because there are so few of us who are still doing it, and it's really, we don't have a system of apprentices and journeymen here in the States the way they do in Europe, so people, all of this is self-funded for people. And so I would love to get to a point where I can do that more, but yes, I do feel a sense of responsibility to keep the craft alive.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the program. I want to thank you again so much for taking the time to be here. So informative, so inspiring, and want to wish you just continued success with future endeavors.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.